Hello, my name is Mr. Patterson. I'm subject leader for English at the Bishop Stortford High School. Details about the course are in the handbook, which is on the bridging unit page of the website. This film will introduce the course and give you an idea of what studying the subject will be like. Let's go back to the beginning. Hello, my name is Mr. Patterson. Fine, you're happy with that. You probably didn't even notice me saying it. But what would have happened if I'd said, hello, my name is Patterson? Slightly off-putting, a little aggressive. How come adding the Mr. changes the way that we understand the greeting? Now, what about if I'd said, hello, my name is Nick? You'd probably be running for the hills. Far too informal. Not what you want from a school teacher. Context is all here. Here are some more examples to make the point. What would we think if hello, my name is Mr. Patterson is how I introduced myself at a party? Or what would we think if I was a High Court judge and started proceedings with a hello, my name is Nick? Similarly, if I was a prison guard and introduced myself, hello, my name is Patterson, might that be a good idea? Language is constantly on the move, and every time we open our mouths or pick up a pen, we ask questions about context. Can I use informal lexis in an essay? Can I write an email to my MP with the salutation, hi? Another side of this discussion is the actual language we use. What would you think if I'd started this little film with the salutation, hello, my name might be Mr. Patterson. You can't see me, so you can't really know who is speaking. Maybe I have a split personality, so one day I'm Mr. Patterson and the next day I'm Mr. Hyde. What we're interested in here is the verb, that move from is to might be. We can see it again here. My name will be Mr. Patterson. I'm not yet born. I'm about to change my name. Discussing the verb is an example of meta-language, that is, having a language which allows us to talk about language. You know quite a lot already, verb, noun, preposition, subject, etc., etc. A-level English language takes this to another level. Similarly, we might look at the possessive pronoun my. Is my name something I own? If so, what does this mean? Is it part of me, or is it something I've been provided with for the duration of my life? And the last example, goodbye, my name could be Mr. Patterson, might seem nonsense, but it reminds us that there are rules of engagement, that there are ideas which lie behind the way we use language, or, in this case, the way we converse. This is part of a man called Grice's maxims, one of which tells us that what we say must be relevant. So, meta-language and theory about language. Add these to context, and these three things allow us to talk meaningfully about the language we use. I'm going to very briefly take you through some of the areas of study. We're going to start with child language acquisition. How did you learn to speak? As you'll see later in the film, you will see how important your roots really are. Here's an example. This is Jeannie. She is a little girl who was brought up in California during the 1960s. Only there was a difference in her upbringing. She was kept in a cot, locked in a room, and nobody talked to her. When she was eventually released from this hell, speech therapists tried to teach her to converse. It was difficult. Jeannie is what we call a feral child, a bit like an animal. And there is something called the critical period, which ends when you're about 13 years old. If you haven't acquired language by this point, you may never acquire it. The other side of this coin is illustrated here by Jean Gleason's so-called WUG test. As you can see, the sheet on the left says, this is a WUG. And now there is another one. There are two of them. There are two, and then there's a blank. And then the one on the right says, this is a man who knows how to rick. He is ricking. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday there's a blank. When confronted with a sheet like the ones on the screen, young children always knew what the answer was, like you knew what the answer was. But why did they know what the answer was when they'd never ever come across these words in their life? Because they are intelligent and pick up language easily. A man called Noam Chomsky said, we have a language acquisition device already embedded in our brain. Thus, do we know how to speak before we are taught how to speak? And here is an extension of this. As a young boy grows up in his family, he will not only learn to speak, he will also acquire a breadth of language. Some of that will be a creation of the family of which he is a part. Not surprising, really. While I speak, see if you can think of any words which are peculiar to you and your family. The example I always give is gung gung, which is my word for blanket. This is called your Idiolect, a very narrow language owned by very few people. When we get out in the big bad world, our language not only broadens, but also starts to fit with the language of others. Here is a group of students at the Bishop Stortford High School whose understanding of the word banjo won't be a musical instrument which you strum, but a place where coaches park before picking up students. Or their understanding of the word cage won't be a place where you keep animals, but where small boys instead play football. This is called Sociolect. This is a shared language, but which can still be quite narrow. Those of you who go dancing will have a shared Sociolect. Those of you who play cricket, similarly. If you go to work in a fast food restaurant, indeed, any social situation will probably have a specific but shared language. An extension of this is dialect, a language shared by a geographical community. This could be Scouse or Geordie, or we'll get to Cockney, or multicultural London English, known as MLE. So we started with you learning language, and we've looked at how your language has developed. Let's have a quick chat about dialect. And let's start with Cockney and its rhyming slang. Cockney was a language developed by market traders in the 19th century so that the police wouldn't be able to understand what they said. You'll know plenty of Cockney, apples and pears, Barack Obamas, etc., and you'll know terms for money, pony or a monkey. The Southeast has since spawned estuary English. Here's Jamie Oliver as my estuary English totem. Jamie's speech will be full of elision like dunno instead of don't know, or th becoming an f as in think. There are some who argue that estuary English is slowly spreading north and eventually will take over from received pronunciation as our accepted way of talking. Finally, MLE, or Multicultural London English. This is the voice of modern Britain. It is what it says, multicultural, mixing the indigenous with the migratory. Perfect language for the present. And I'll leave you to pick out some examples because I'll only embarrass myself. And it's not too much of a leap to now talk about social groups. We're all organised into social groups. Have a think about how many you belong to: students, sportsmen and women, boys, girls, etc., and teenagers. Teens have their own language. You know this, you speak it. But again, we have theorists who will tell you what you already know yourself. Eckert will tell you that slang is used by teenagers to cut them off from older age groups. Stenstrom will tell you that teenagers overlap others when talking, that teenagers name call and use a taboo vocabulary. And just one more example of social groups to move us naturally towards language and gender. Here are some men and some women. In fact, it's not men, it's a little boy who's been brought up by his Dutch dad, he's wearing a Feyenoord shirt, to be just like his dad and swear like a trooper. Theorists would suggest that when women speak, they speak with what is called overt prestige. That is, they like to conform and don't take to a more informal or even taboo vocabulary. An argument to support this might be that they bring up the children and they want their children to behave well. And part of behaving well is how you speak. Men apparently are less concerned. They can speak with what is called covert prestige. That is, they are more happy to use an informal lexis and taboo language. They like to show that they are rule breakers. And if our Feyenoord supporting friend is anything to go by, they pass this on to their children, especially their sons. But just remember, context. What happens if mum and dad work equally and share the housework? What happens if it is mum who likes to go out and socialise whilst dad stays at home and supports the children doing the homework? Then it wouldn't be such a happy theory. And naturally, this leads us more specifically to language and gender. Parliament is a good place to illustrate language and gender. Contextually, that word again, Parliament was, for most of the 20th century, a male preserve with women barely playing a role. In the last 50 years, that has changed, and there are now 220 female MPs, which means that men still hold about 2/3 of the seats. But we are becoming more aware of how we speak and why we speak the way we do. My illustrations are David Cameron's patronising put down of Angela Eagle with "calm down, dear," Boris Johnson's use of the word piffle to describe a Labour MP denouncing the death threats that women MPs were getting, and very recently, Matt Hancock's patronising of Rosina Allen Khan by telling her to watch her tone. It may be that none of these put downs were to do with gender, see context, but you can't bet your life on it. What have the gender theorists said? Basically, they said 100 years ago that women were inferior to men, 50 years ago that men dominated women and women spoke accordingly, 30 years ago that men and women were just different, which is why they spoke differently, and this century, where we are starting to decide that it has nothing to do with gender at all, and everything to do with things like power and, you guessed it, context. Let's now really broaden things out. The letter on the left is the old English letter thorn. The letter on the right is our long S, a bit like the German S set, which fell out of favour in the English alphabet by the start of the 19th century. Why? How did our language develop? What was the importance of Dr. Johnson's dictionary in the 1700s? What impact did mass education have on our use of language? How has the meteoric rise of technology and, until this year, the ease with which we can get around the globe affected our language? We'll also be asking these kinds of questions, or more pertinently, you will be wanting to ask these kinds of questions. We are a seminar-based subject, which means plenty of discussion. Discussion is fueled through question, so come prepared to talk. Finally, coursework. This is where you take something you find interesting and investigate it in a piece of research. Here are some of the things which students investigated this year. How men and women speak in Made in Chelsea or Love Island. How language changes across the generations of one family. Comparison of the Tory party conference speeches of Boris Johnson and Theresa May. And the exercise of power in Peaky Blinders. You also produce a piece of creative writing. You write something based on a model. We use Mills and Boon as our model, and students write an episode from their own Mills and Boon novel. Finally, here's Michael Rosen. He hosts a program called Word of Mouth. It's 30 minutes of language discussion every week. However, he won't be hosting it anytime soon, as he's just spent 47 days in intensive care. But download the podcast and listen to the ones that take your interest. The handbook also has a reading list. I would recommend Bill Bryson as someone who's accessible, but also informative. We hope to see you in September. Enjoy your summer.